Okay, so you really want to know, huh? Fine. I'm gonna start by telling you this. And this is important, so listen up. Your entire life, this one and many others, you've been a god who uses its absolute power to make yourself powerless. Entire cultures, especially this one, have all been afraid of their weaknesses, supposedly. When in reality, they've all been afraid of their power. This goes beyond the matrix of reality. This is something much deeper than that. This is eternal. This is fully realizing your consciousness. This is infinite. This is evolution. This is our divine right.
All right, everybody. Welcome to this live stream. I'm really excited. I've got a good friend and coach, Paul Cope, on the show today. Really excited about his work. I just want to I'm going to show off your website a little bit, Paul. He has just written a new book. You can actually get the first 4 chapters for free. And a big shout out to my friend Honey for putting Paul on my radar. I'm really excited to be able to speak with him today. We're excited to maybe engage a little bit as well in the live chat here. So thanks for being a part of it, everybody. I want to shout out real quick my friends at Content Safe. They are helping us, really proliferate things throughout the internet. If you need help distributing your stuff, you're not super tech savvy, those guys are super great. I'm a big fan of their work and what they do. I also want to say I am also a coach. And if you want to talk to me, I'd love to chat with you and see where you're at and what you're dealing with. And if I can even solve your problem, not to say that I can just solve problems, but if we can talk through some stuff just on a introductory call, I'd love to see if we can get to the root of some of these things. That's what we're going to be talking a lot about today with Paul, is really getting to the root of things. So if you are interested in chatting with me, you can go to my website. The link is in the description below. I'm really excited though. This is going to be a great conversation, and I hope to really cover a lot of cool ground with Paul. Paul Cope, thank you so much for hopping on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I was already enjoying our chat just before, and I was like, this is going to be good. We got to start rolling. So yeah, welcome. I really like your work. I've seen a lot of the stuff that you put out on YouTube. There's a book on the way. I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm really excited about it. I think your take is really cool, getting to the root of all problems. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to this conclusion and what made you start to put this work together?
Yeah, sure. I should say first, if the book hasn't arrived yet, I keep saying to people, if even once it comes, if you've got the hard copy, if you don't like it, it's like a weapon. It's like a brick. So you can use it for other things as well. It's multifunctional. You can use it to hold doors open with. You can use it to defend yourself against intruders. So it's worth a lot of money. Maybe I should start marketing it like that. Do you like one of those infomercials?
Yeah,
it's a book, it's a brick,
that's right.
It's a toy for the children.
It's multifunctional. You can read it and then go to a protest. So
exactly. There we go. But yeah, I mean, it's a big book. So it's always funny when people say to me, "Oh, like, can you sum it up?" But I'm like, it's something I've been working on as I've done more and more content and more interviews and things. Is how do you sum it up? What do you boil it down to? And I mean, we can dig into whatever bits of detail of this you would like to. But my backstory was I was a lawyer. Basically, I was a corporate lawyer. I went down the very traditional route that the world tells us we should go down to make ourselves happy. And I reached a point where, to the outside world, if you were looking at my life from the outside, you'd be like, he has nailed it. Like not a superstar, not famous, but in a local setting, a businessman with my own law firm, a beautiful wife, a flash car, a beautiful city centre apartment with big high ceilings and arched windows. And I owned 5 properties that I rented out, making lots of money. And at the peak of that, I was at my most depressed. I was suicidal. I was planning on how to kill myself. And I just reached a point where I was like, there's got to be more than this. And it's something I talk to people about now, about depression and suicide. I've got quite probably a controversial take on people who are depressed and suicidal. And I really don't like people who've never experienced it or qualified to talk about it, advising people. Because I always say to people, look, the worst thing that can happen when you're suicidal is to have people say to you, your life's fine, everything's great, you've got a wonderful life. Because you're like, no, that makes it worse, not better.
Right. That's exactly right. No, that's
because I mean, we'll dig into this. That, you know, the low to the root is shame. I feel ashamed of myself. I'm not good enough. And now you're telling me that the way I feel about wanting to kill myself is I should be ashamed of as well. And you're like, wow. Yeah. So I always say to people now, if you feel like you want to kill yourself and end your life, let's not scrap that. That's a valid emotion. Let's just park it to one side. And this is what I effectively did. I was like, right, well, if I've got to the point in my life where I want to kill myself, that's brutal. Like, that's going to hurt a lot of people when I go. So why don't I make that option 1,000 and just find out what, like 999 other things to try first? Because whatever it is I'm worried about in my life that's leading me to want to kill myself, let's try solving that first. Let's do that. You know, if I'm unhappy in my relationship, leave the relationship. Like, leaving the relationship can't be as bad as killing yourself. So let's just do that first. And if I've finished the 999 things and I'm still like, this world's rubbish, well, you've still got that option there. It's always still going to be there as a backup. Don't worry about it. It doesn't go away. So basically what I did, once I reached a point, lots of different things happened. I started seeing a therapist. And that was a big deal for me at the time. I was 38. I'm from Liverpool in the UK, and Liverpool is a very like manly, old school city. Like, you know, that's the type of place you walk into a bar and people say, "What are you looking at?" And it's a very friendly and lovely place, and it's full of fun, but it's very old school. All the men are very old school, get on with life, very stoic. So to go to a therapist, I didn't know anybody who'd ever been to a therapist. That was something I saw on TV. But that was the biggest, probably the best decision I've ever made in my life. Started working with a therapist, then I started working with a coach in New York online, started working with another coach in the UK, and just slowly completely changed my life, completely ripped apart that old life, and was digging into what was the root. Because I always say to people, I had loads of like symptoms in my life. So I was unhappy in my marriage. I was unhappy in my company, even though it was my company and I'd built it. Even though I was making loads of money, I was always poor. I'd never had any money. I couldn't manage my finances. I had chronic health problems. I was depressed. So I had all these like high level issues. And what I realized was, when I started working on them all in different places, reading lots of books, consuming loads of content online, as I say, working with therapists and coaches, I started realizing that they all came down, or where I came to with my work was, they all came down to the same thing. They all came back to childhood and lessons we learn in childhood. And at the root of that, how we feel about ourselves. So low self-esteem, low self-worth, the feeling that we're not good enough. And that, when I have to sum it up, that's the root of it all. So what I solved all these issues in my life. And then it was the start of, we just touched on this before we started going live. It was the start of the pandemic when everything shut down. I was like, okay, I was about to start. I really like public speaking. So I was about to start going down that path. And then obviously when the world locks down, one of the things you're not allowed to do anymore is speak to crowds in public. So I was like, oh, I need a new plan. And I thought to myself, well, I've brought all this. I often say to people, I love superhero movies. The book is full of superhero movie references. I think if I've got a superpower, sadly, I mean, I would love to be able to fly or fire laser beams out my eyes. But the superpower it looks like I got, which would make for a boring superhero in a movie, but is all right for real life, is, even as a lawyer, I've always been really good at bringing lots of information together and then summarizing it to people in a way that is easy to understand. So, because something I've always found is, I'd be reading a psychology book by a famous doctor or a famous psychologist, and it'd be full of really interesting information. But I vividly remember once getting to a point in the book where there was a 12-syllable word. I counted it. And I was sitting there as a 39-year-old man spelling out this word like a 4-year-old would, one syllable at a time. And once I'd done that, I thought, how many people are going to read this book? Like, I'm an ex-lawyer. I'm used to reading really dry, boring stuff. So I'll wade through it, work through it, and to get the information. most people aren't going to do that. And I don't blame them. So my thing is, right, I bring all this information together and I package it up in a story about the Incredible Hulk. And I tell you a story about the Incredible Hulk. And most people go, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense. That's what I always felt my superpower was. So then I was like, well, can I take all the stuff I've learned that's helped my life and can I share it with other people and can it help them? And that's what I started doing at the start of last year and started coaching people all around the world. And that's what led to writing the book, because it was ultimately, it worked. When I started sharing it with other people, it resonated with them. They liked the approach. And then it was, well, as you know, you can only coach so many people. Right. And I was like, well, how else can I get this information out? Because I'm so passionate about it and I believe in it so much. And I was like, well, write a book. I'm a decent writer. So you write a book, you give more people access to it, start a YouTube channel, more people get access to that, and just get the word out to as many people as you can.
Yeah, man, it's a great word too. I know you've done a lot of great work, and we even have friends in common too. Come to find out, of course, you know, not a surprise there really, but I think it's great. I couldn't agree with you more about really it coming down to self-worth, and I think for a lot of people, and for some reason, specifically as men, that seems to be like a bit of a challenge, you know, shame and self-worth. I think that's about as low as you can get on David Hawkins' scale too of consciousness, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I love the point that you made at the top where you're like, even though from the outside looking in, you look at your life and you've got all these things, these material objects, you know, you're making good money, whatever, and things from the outside looking in look like you have a great life. And then for you to say, you know, you're not happy, you're emotionally struggling, and somehow that's invalidated. And then you're caused to feel more shame as a result of that. I mean, that is really powerful to think about, isn't it? I think all these feelings are valid. And I have to, first of all, give anybody credit for just being honest and acknowledging the elephant in the room. If something's wrong, that's okay. You're not a bad person. You know, you didn't do anything wrong to necessarily make that happen, you know, but it's okay to ask the question. And then can we talk a little bit about that when you finally said, you know what, I'm fed up and I've got to do something?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? It ties into more of the stuff I talk to people about. And it was interesting. I was listening to someone I've coached be interviewed by Daniel James, who you mentioned before, last week, and he made this point, which I really liked it because it's one of my favorite points. He said, there's this big thing about if you've got problems, talk to people. And I remember even before I'd started any of this work, I was like, that's nonsense. Like, because talking to the wrong person can make your life so much worse. And I remember even in my old marriage and in my family, I would think to myself, do you know that there's the saying, a problem shared is a problem halved? And I would be like, that's not true. Like whenever I share a problem, it gets multiplied by about 10. Because now I'm not just dealing with my problem. Now I've got to deal with your reaction to it. And now you're worried about it and you're anxious about it. And now I feel guilty for giving that to you. And I'd be like, right. So then I would just keep stuff bottled inside. And when I went to speak to a therapist, that was huge because all of a sudden, the way you've just reacted, been talking about emotions is exactly the way I am, which I've learned, but I wasn't back then. I remember vividly the number of times I would say something out loud to him, and it was the first time I'd ever said it, and I would think to myself, what I'm about to say out loud now is awful. And if I'd have said it to most people in my family and friendship groups, and this is not their fault, this is unintentional when people do things that are more damaging, because they've not had any of this training or coaching. I would expect those people to react badly to it. And so I'd say this stuff out loud to a therapist thinking it's a safe place. I wonder how he'll react. And his reaction was always just absolutely neutral. And I remember being shocked. I was always like, did you hear? I remember saying to him something once. And then afterwards saying to him, did you hear what I just said? And he said, yeah. And I went, well, don't you think it's awful? And he went, no. He said, everybody who sits in that chair talking to me says the exact same thing. And I was like, really? That's insane. And just having that space where I could say anything was so powerful. And it's something I talk to people a lot about now is, don't get me wrong, if you've got no other option but to talk to anybody, talk to anybody. It's better to talk to anybody than nobody.
Right.
But if you have got the choice, find someone who is qualified and trained to create a space in which whatever you say is fine. I can tell just by talking to you, you'd be the same. But something hopefully I'm very good at, and like to think my coaching clients think I'm good at, is just that. Just holding the space for people to just say whatever they want to say. And people will often say to me, I love our calls because it's the one place where I can just say anything and there's no judgment. It doesn't matter. I was chatting to someone the other day, a 15-year-old girl, and she was talking about how when she expresses certain things, it was about death. Someone had died, and she was saying, I didn't feel anything like for that person who died. And I mentioned it to somebody else and they told me I was heartless. And I said, you're not heartless at all. Why? That's just the way you feel. If you don't feel anything, you don't feel anything. You can't make yourself feel something for somebody. And what was your connection to the person? And she was like, well, I didn't really know them. And I said, well, it's absolutely normal that you wouldn't feel anything then. I said it, and I went to go a step further than that. All of the people who you see being very dramatic about people dying when they don't really know them, I would suggest there's probably an element of theatre for society in that, because they're trying to fit in. They think it's normal that you should make a big deal of someone. But it was just the interesting interaction that just that very, it seems such a small thing, but it's such a big thing. She felt like she couldn't even express a very basic emotion for fear of what someone would think of it. And her fear was proved right, because the reaction was not what she would have liked. So just that ability and this is what I've massively learned from people, therapists and coaches, and like to pass on, for people to create space where you can just feel whatever you feel and understand that it's okay. That was a massive, massive part of my adventure.
Yeah, I mean, I get excited actually when I think about the honesty. And for me, so we have a lot in common. It's cool. I was kind of pursuing a stand-up comedy, so as a public speaking kind of thing, really before the pandemic, and still am, as much as you can in a pandemic. But very similarly, really just wanting to speak and really connect with people, in that way. And I can see a lot of similarities in the approach as well. But just starting something in a weird economic time, and being open and honest enough to really speak about the true feelings. Comedy for me helped that tremendously, because I couldn't really resolve the two worlds. So I was like, oh, I feel miserable and ashamed inside. Nope, I've got to tell my amalgam, my mantra for the day. Everything is perfect, and everything is great, and I have to fake it till I fake it, and then it's still fake, But with me, with writing comedy, I was forced to face trauma and things that have happened in my life that are fucking hilarious. You know what I mean? Not to me, but to everyone else. And so being really honest is something I want to talk about, because I think that's really where that power is, and being vulnerable and being willing to share. And hopefully you can find that right person, but there's so much power there. And I love what you said, it's okay to feel the way you feel. You don't need to hide it. I feel like more and more in society now, we feel like we have to kind of hide, and maybe even be careful what we say, because cancel culture, some people, right? Who knows, so it kind of makes it to where we kind of have to retreat more and more in a way.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting that we've even got the stand-up comedy thing in common, because that was on my list last year, and I'm just starting up to do that again, because don't push it. And that's one of the things, becoming the real version of me, which is what this whole thing has been for me, understanding how much of me I was really shutting down and suppressing. And that was hugely, and this is common in lots of people I work with, the creative side, the side that just wanted to play and stand on stage and be stupid, and that had massively just been suppressed and turned off, because I had to be a grown-up and I had to be a lawyer and wear a suit and all the rest of it. But I couldn't agree with you more about the comedy thing. And something, we've probably got this in common as well. I do think there's a massive opportunity out there to share this stuff with people, and it not always have to be so miserable.
Yeah.
So something I love about my coaching calls is, some of my clients have said to me, like when they've all been done on Zoom so far in the 18 months I've been doing it, and they'll leave whatever room they're in having their session with me, and they said they'll walk into the next room and their parents or their husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever will say to them, "What are you doing in that room? I thought you were meant to be having like a coaching session about dark stuff. You spent half the time laughing."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's such a compliment. I love that. I take that as such a compliment, because it's like, yeah, we can get into this stuff and we can still make it light, and we can still find a way to laugh at ourselves and things like that. And it does make me laugh, because I do. I don't know if you've had this. Excuse me, got a bit of cough. I'll often find myself watching things that are on one level. I love saying to everybody, like, two things can exist at the same time. We live in a world that tries to make everything black and white. But on one level, I'm like, wow, that is so funny. And on another level, I'm like, and hugely traumatic for whoever it was involved. So, do you know what I mean? Like, someone will tell me a story about something that happened to me as a child, and I'm like, oh, trauma. Like, you'll need to speak to her. One of my clients told me a story about their kids the other day, and we were both laughing about it. I went, because it was a funny story. And then I just went to them, well, that's what you're putting the money away for them for, when they can go to therapy when they're 18.
Right, exactly. Oh man, yeah. Being able to laugh and bring some levity to this stuff, I think it's hugely important, because I think in context, once we can heal, or at least accept, right? It's really not about healing or letting go. I think it's really just about accepting it, and whatever that thing is that we're trying to face or overcome. And I think at that point, once we can do that and just sort of surrender, then we do get to play. That is, what else would, joy do, or whatever's on those higher levels of consciousness. We're not always going to live there, but like, what else would happen? What is really all of this anyway? But all the world's a stage, right? Like a little Shakespearean on a Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. I often, I'll start this process with people, and we start off, we dig into childhood and we go through all these things. And once I've got them to a certain stage, I'm like, look, the reality, this is all nonsense. It's all make-believe. Like, once you can get to a certain level with it all, and the word you used there, the acceptance is huge. You can just go, it's nonsense. Like, we've literally invented most of this stuff. We were at one point. I love dogs, and I love little kids, and I love spending time with them all, because I just say to people, this is what we're meant to be like. Dogs just run around looking at us, and we think we're this superior race, this like superior civilization, and dogs must look at us thinking, what are you doing? Like, why don't you just stay at home and play with me in the garden? It's so much more fun. When you play with me, you look like you're having loads of fun, and then you put on this serious face, and you put on these serious dark clothes, and you go out the house for 10 hours, and when you come back, you look very, very unhappy. That's basically the view of the world that dogs get, and they must chat to each other going, these humans are crazy. Like, they're crazy.
Well, if you look at it too, like, we're just playing different levels of game where it's more serious, right? Like, a kid will play house and it's a fun thing and they don't take it too seriously. I'm in here, doing my taxes and pulling my hair out at this game, it just gets all this attention and anxiety and seriousness. And then somebody, runs through the house and I got to freak out because this game is so much more important than that little childish game. It's the same thing. There's no difference.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. There's a comedy sketch. Do you know what? This ties in perfectly with what you just said before about people being afraid to say stuff. Like, I love the comedian Louis C.K.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
as a comedian, I just think he may be my favorite ever comedian. Maybe second only to Billy Connolly. I don't know whether you know Billy.
Actually, well, I do. Yeah, I do. It's been a while since I've thought of him, but
so he's very old. He's an old school comedian now, but he's huge, and he was big in America back in the day, I think as well. But internationally he was big. But he was huge in Britain. So he's maybe my number one, Louis C.K. number two. But then obviously Louis C.K. had a huge controversy around him about sexual misdemeanors. And I always say to people, it's like, once that's happened, you're not allowed to think he's a funny comedian anymore. And it's like, whenever I go to mention Louis C.K., I feel like I have to go through this whole rigmarole of going, by the way, I don't agree with, I don't condone his sexual misdemeanors. I just think his jokes were funny. But
Right.
he does this great sketch about God. I love thinking about things like this. Like I love thinking about the way dogs talk to each other. I love thinking about the way the trees talk to each other. And I love like any idea of like whatever you think is the creator or God or the universe. But he does this great scene of like God coming down and talking to man. And it is, I can't do it justice, but it is exactly what we're talking about here. It's like, what are you talking about? Man's like, I'm doing my taxes. And God's like, what are taxes? It's like, well, it's when I get the money from my job. And God's like, what's a job? Like,
Right.
what are you talking about? Well, I need a job to get the money. What's money? Well, I need money to buy video games. What have you been doing? Like, I left it. And it goes on and on, but it's like, why do you need money to buy food? I left your food all over the floor. There is food all over the floor. Just eat that. That's what you're meant to eat. It's like, but it's not bacon and it's not chocolate.
Well, I can't argue with bacon.
Mate, honestly, this is one of my problems with all this stuff. It's like I've gone through phases of being very, very fit and healthy and stuff. And I used to even say this, that I ran a marathon a few years ago and was very fit and trained with a personal trainer. And he used to give all these like talks to people who were very overweight and unfit coming into his gym. And I remember I used to talk to them outside because they'd listen. He would like talk to them as if the way they're living their life is crazy, and they love pizzas and kebabs and chips, and he'd be saying to them. I remember vividly him saying to them once, "You should, if you want a snack, you should eat frozen peas." And I was like, "Man, they're so far away from eating frozen peas as a snack.
Right.
This is not going to work." But I remember I got to the point where I said to him, "Look, you can tell me whatever you want, and everybody else on TV can tell me whatever they want. Chocolate and ice cream are nicer to eat than apples. They just are.
Yeah.
Like they might be really bad for me, and they might kill me and shorten my life. But you can't. There's no point trying to pretend that apples taste nicer than ice cream.
Right.
Like all you need to do is give them both to a dog or give them both to a child and say to them, which of these tastes nicer?"
Right.
It's like, let's stop pretending. And with all of this stuff in life, one of my big things is, with the humor and stuff, stop pretending, stop bullshitting. We don't need to. Just forget all that.
Yeah.
Like I can, and even with losing weight, one of my clients is got to a point where she's losing weight, getting in shape. And she said to me the other day, "Do you know what? I've completely changed my attitude to all this through the work we've done. We've never discussed losing weight. But she's like, now I've just reached a point where if I want a piece of chocolate, I just have a piece of chocolate. And I don't beat myself up about it. And I don't get into this massive spiral of shame and self-hate that makes me want to eat a whole bucket of chocolate. I just have some chocolate and then it's done." And I'm like, there we go. And all of a sudden, life gets easier. She starts losing weight. She's happier. She's more content.
Less constriction, more freedom. It's like the tightness just continues to tighten down, and the fun, playful, elements, those continue to just go up and up and up. And bringing up, somebody, for instance, Louis C.K., I think it's important to be able to separate what people do or say from the person themselves. That's, I think, one of the problems that people kind of want to lump. You can't deny the fact that, because he wrote on everything. Like as a comedian, like that guy is like, wow. I mean, his resume is insane. I mean, he was writing like in Living Color and stuff, in the 90s. So, basically everything that came out in America, the Dana Carvey show, and then all the specials. And he even put a new, basically said to the whole comedy industry, I'm going to do a special a year. That had never been done before. And then he would take the end of his previous special and put it at the beginning of his next one, just to make it harder for himself. So, I mean, clearly a glutton for punishment, but as far as like a heavyweight at what they do, definitely somebody who has a lot of validity, right, within that specific industry.
Yeah.
And I have to give credit where credit's due, and we have to acknowledge the truth of what that a broken clock's right twice a day. Just because so-and-so said it and I don't like so-and-so doesn't make it, untrue necessarily. But it's an easy habit to kind of get lumped in. I love your kind of like having to decide between this or that. But
honestly, it's one of the things there's a big part in the book about it. And it's one of, if I could click my fingers and do things to help the world solve its problems. One of the things I would take away in an instant is black and white thinking, because the whole idea that everything is one thing or another. So even, without getting too deep, politically, you're either a Republican or a Democrat, Labour or Conservative in the UK. You're either right or left. Even skin colour, I say this to people all the time now. You're either black or white. I'm like, it's nonsense. It's made up. We created it. There's no such. I've never met a black person in my entire life, a person who is the colour black, and I've never met a white person in my entire life. If I always say the same example, if we didn't know about any of this stuff, and this hadn't been drummed into us for generations, again, if you took a child and you brought a child in to see me and said, "What colour is this man? Like, what colour is his skin?" If the child said white, you'd be like, what school is this kid going to? Like, this isn't white. Look, that's my AirPod case.
Right?
Like, how far away is this colour from this colour? Pretty far. It's crazy. But someone at some point created this division for their own ends, and then we all just followed it forever. And now everything is one or the other. And then Democrat and Republican, exactly the same thing. It's not real. It's make-believe. So we've, more than ever before in history, I think, we've reached a point where you'll have someone they class themselves as a Democrat. And because someone who has got the Republican label has said something, it's like, right, well, I can't agree with that then. That's insane.
Yeah.
Why can't you agree with it? Well, they're a Republican. Like, that doesn't mean anything. It was just something we made up.
It is, yeah.
And that one thing in itself just creates so many problems.
Oh, yeah. And one thing that I like is like even a level deeper is if you have an opinion that's different from someone who does affiliate with one side, they'll immediately categorize you to the other side and say, you're not part of my group, you're part of that other group because of that one opinion that you have. But it's like,
yes,
again with that,
100%. God, we could talk about this for hours in itself, couldn't we? I'm like, the number of times recently, I'm like, I see it happening to people online, very prominent figures, and I mean, it's generally the right wing thing seems to be the thing that's labelled at people. And I've been born and raised. Liverpool is a Democrat, socialist, Labour city. Always has been, always will be, probably. Oh, that might actually be an exaggeration. I'm not sure it always has been. And I see people who are very much in that same camp being labelled right wing because they said one thing that was slightly right of centre. That was it. It was like it was a slightly conservative idea. And it's like, right wing, put him in the box. That's it now. And you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah. It's like, it's pretty funny. I would love to talk about maybe some ways to approach that, because I still get looped into it. I was on a chat not too long ago and I was falling right into it. My friend Ralph called me out. Like, he was like, because it's real easy to just kind of go there. It's almost become natural. I don't think it's natural in itself, but maybe thinking about how we can try to break out of thinking that way. What are some things you think we could incorporate as tools for that?
Well, there's a massive one, and I mean, let me say this, and then we'll go into the deeper stuff. You mentioned before David Hawkins. So my favorite book of all time is Letting Go. I must have listened to that book 8 times in the space of 18 months when I first started doing all this stuff. And something he says in that book, which I love and I've repeated in my book, is, and this is linked to the self-worth thing. When we form an opinion, we tend to call it my opinion. We create an emotional attachment to it. And when we've got low self-worth, which is basically everybody on the planet, especially in the Western world these days, unless you've done any of this work, and even for the people who've done the work, I always say it again, that's not black and white, it's on a scale. So
I saw that video, dude. I love that. That's excellent. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. Like it's something I absolutely love, because even just changing that viewpoint from black and white to on a scale for everything in your life, it's like, well, even self-esteem, self-worth. I've been doing this work for 3 years now. I've just written a book on it. I coach other people, but it's like going to the gym. If I stop doing the work myself, my score on the self-worth scale slides down. I've got to keep doing the work. I'm very rarely at 100 out of 100. So this is always a moving feast for people. So if you've got lower self-worth, lower self-esteem, and then you form an opinion that you say is yours, that opinion attaches to you. Well, what happens next is, if someone challenges your opinion, they're not just challenging the opinion, they're challenging your worth. And you don't know this is happening. This is all just at a very deep subconscious level. But that's why people struggle so much to change their mind on stuff. And something David Hawkins said in that book, which I love, is a very small language change. Instead of calling something my opinion, call it an opinion, or the opinion I currently hold. Because what that does is, I talk a lot about holding things loosely. Like, if we just hold things loosely in our lives, everything's easier. One of our problems is we want to control everything. Well, if instead of calling something my opinion, I say it's an opinion, and when you stop and think about it, that's all it ever is anyway. Opinions we hold are very rarely things we created. It's usually something we heard from someone else and we've attached to. Well, if we say it's an opinion that I currently follow, that opens us up straight away to, when somebody challenges it, to say, well, it's not about me, it's about the opinion. And that makes it much, much easier to say, I'm going to change my mind. I can change my mind. It's not attached to my self-worth anymore. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's like we personify these opinions, and they become these like egregores, or pendulums, right? But like, that makes a lot of sense. I really, really like that approach. It makes it to where, like, one of my biggest heroes is Robert Anton Wilson, and he wrote a book called Prometheus Rising, among many, many others. But one of the things that he says is, instead of saying, like Mozart is better than Beethoven, for instance, he's like, it appears to me that Mozart is more talented than Beethoven, right? Like, so now all of a sudden, like, that statement is way less loaded, right? Yep. And so we can, instead of feel like we have to embody this position or this idea and like really personify it, like there's like a subconscious like spell I think people are under, and I've been under it myself, so I don't say that in judgment, but just as far as like identifying with a group, and taking on those attributes, it's subconscious, I think.
Oh, there's so much in it, and there's bits I don't even talk about in the book about needing to identify with a tribe and where that comes from. I talk about the tribal thing in the book, but not where it actually comes from a human interaction perspective. Like back in the day when our brains were formed and loads of the way we act now are formed, most of the stuff we've developed is about survival. So needing to be part of a group at one point in the history of humanity was about survival, because if you were part of a group, you were more likely to stay alive, literally. So that need, that drive to be accepted in a group was hardwired a long, long time ago. The problem we've got now is we're still running around. I know you know this, but for people listening, I'm sure they'll know as well some of this. The problem we've got now is we're running around in these systems that are thousands of years old, or they were programmed thousands of years ago, some of it, and we're still reacting as though we're under threat. Like our lives are under threat, which for the most part, for most of us, is not true. And loads of this work is about being able to just detach those things and be able to see things for what they really are, which is, I talk a lot about the stories we tell ourselves. And when I say I joke around about everything being imaginary, I'm like, well, that's not even exaggeration. One of the chapters in the book, I start by saying, what would I do if I told you, what would you say if I told you your whole life was make-believe? Because it is. Like, I had this conversation with my mum the other day, and I actually think once you get to a certain point in your life, this stuff you're better off not hearing, because it's too late. Like, you don't want to. I actually don't want to pull down every story my mum's ever told herself when she's 75 years old. It could be. Do you know what I mean? It could be way too destabilizing for her.
Sure.
But she said something to me, and she said it with absolute certainty about something her mum told her when she was a child, and I'm like, the chances of that being actually factually true are so slim. It's crazy. It's a memory of something that happened 70 years ago. So what you've actually got at this point is a story you're telling yourself about something that happened 70 years ago. I often watch people, my mum and dad are both still alive and married, and I'll watch them have an argument about something that happened 40 years ago. And they're both adamant that they're right. And to me now, I just find it amusing, because I'm like, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Why does it matter? It was 40 years ago. And secondly, you're both just making up a story. We will never know what actually happened in that situation because it was 4 decades ago.
Right.
Let it go. Let it go. It doesn't matter. But it's interesting watching how and don't get me wrong, this is, I never want this to come across as me thinking I'm better than everybody else. And this was 100% me up until 3 years ago. And I always joke with my family. My sister said something to me the other day, and I said to her, well, it's cost me tens of thousands of pounds and a lot of hard work to get over some of this trauma. So let's be clear about that. Like, it cost me a lot of money. And I'm still working on it now. One of my favorite things my coach in New York told me, Ralph Rue is his name, brilliant, one of my favorite people in the world, big mentor. One of the things that really helped me in my whole process was we're always a student. Never think that you're a master, because once you start thinking you're a master of something, that's when the expectations come in, and that's when you'll start reversing the work you've done. Because when you start messing up when you're a master, it's like, oh God, I'm not good enough anymore. When you're a student, it's like, I'm always learning, and I'll be learning this until the day I die. So this is never me saying I've got this all figured. I haven't. I'm just passing on stuff I've learned that I still work on every day. But that whole self-worth thing and the stories we tell, it's so powerful. When I look back at some of the stories I used to tell myself about who I was, even forget the outside world, and I look back now and think, God, that was just make-believe, just nonsense. One of my favorite ones, I say this to people all the time, is how many people I know who tell themselves a story that they're laid back. And they'll say it out loud. They'll go to people, I'm really laid back. And you watch other people's reactions, and you're like, you're not.
Yeah, free spirit t-shirt. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If you have to wear a shirt, it must be true.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Perfect example.
But I love that. Yeah, it's like we have the power to sort of tell the story. And when we do a lot of this work, it's really about, or at least for me, it has been facing difficult times in my memories and basically changing my relationship to those moments, and not invalidating them, but being really honest, and forthcoming. And it definitely helps to have somebody that you can talk to back to that point and feel really comfortable with. That's something that actually just like, I don't know, it just means a lot to me. I love it when I'm able to have a really honest conversation when someone opens up like that, because it says a lot more than just the truth, but I find that that's been basically a lot of the work, is going back through these memories that certainly are exaggerated, overblown, inaccurate, and saying, okay, I need to change my relationship to this and change that story. That who is he who makes the grass green, right? It's up to us to determine what that story is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, funnily enough, literally on the green point, when I first changed my life, about sort of 6 to 8 months into my journey, I sold everything. I'd left my marriage, I'd sold my law firm, my business closed down, and I went to Bali and ended up staying there for 3 months. And I remember it being in Bali and going, oh my God, the green here, like the leaves are greener than anywhere else I've ever been. And it was only like months later when I came back, I was like, that's nonsense. It's the same color green as it was everywhere else. But inside me felt better than it had ever felt. So I'm projecting out onto the world this incredible beauty. And I was like, isn't that funny?
That's beautiful. Yeah. As within, so without too. And I think that's really the source, to start to tap into. It's like you're saying, as a muscle. It's like a muscle, like your self-worth and the way you feel. It's a muscle. We have to remember to like nurture, I think, that fountain of like emotions of love that we can tap into, but it does take some work and some time to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest things I think it's important for people to know, is that wherever they are on the scale, wherever they are on their own adventure in life, you can change things, and it takes time. And that's why I use the gym personal training analogy a lot, because I still think mental and emotional well-being is such an alien thing to us as humans still. And there's been a lot of developments in recent years, obviously, but it's still I still think it's crazy we separate mental and physical health. Like, like our heads are separate to our bodies somehow. It's crazy. So there's that, but people understand the physical stuff more. So people understand the idea of going to the gym and getting fit. So I use that as an analogy all the time. Like the number of times that a client will come to me and I won't have seen them for a month and they'll say, I've dipped and I'm feeling bad. I'll feel like I've gone back to the beginning. And I'll say to them, what work have you been doing when we haven't been speaking? And they'll say, what do you mean? I'll say, have you been, all the stuff we've talked about? Have you been journaling? Have you been talking to someone about it? Have you been doing any written exercises? No, nothing. And I'll say to them, so let's do the analogy. Let's say you'd come to me and you were 10 stone overweight and I was a personal trainer and I'd helped you get in the best shape of your life, doing exercise every day, even when you weren't with me, eating the right food every day, even when you weren't with me, and just generally looking after yourself. If we didn't see each other for a month and every day during that month you'd done no exercise and you'd eaten pizzas every day, would you expect to be as fit as when we last trained together? And they go, no. And I go, it's no different with this stuff. It's exactly the same. And straight away people are like, oh yeah, I get it. I've got to maintain the work I'm doing. Like, yes. And it takes time. It takes time and it's step by step. And all the cliches. You can take all the cliches, but I often say to people, most cliches exist for a reason. Like if they weren't real, we wouldn't still use them. If there's a reason we do this stuff step by step. It's can't. The lad I trained with, the personal trainer when I was training to do a marathon, and I was really out of shape. I was probably 4 or 5 stone heavier than I am now. And in a year, went from that to running a marathon. I really worked hard and it really good. But someone came into him, and I loved his reply. Someone came into him in May and said to him, and they were overweight, and said, I want to get in shape and want to get a 6-pack for the summer. Is it possible? And my personal trainer said to him, yeah, if you mean next summer.
Yeah, right.
I really like that. Yeah, he was like, yeah, I can sort you out. Don't worry about it. Perfect. You can't do it in a month.
Right.
So stop being ridiculous. And don't get me wrong, we touched on this before we started going live. There will be someone online who will sell you something that says you can do it in a month. They'll say you can change your emotional health. They'll say you can change your physical health. And you know what? It might work temporarily. And for some people, it might work permanently. But for the most part, for most people, this is a long-term game.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that, man. I really love the scale and understanding that it's not a off and on switch, our self-worth. It's just not. It's something that we need to do every day. Any tips or tools for that? One thing I like is I just practice in the morning. Like I don't really meditate, as it were. I kind of do. I just kind of lay in bed and just try to do a gratitude practice. I was talking to someone, I think it was Daniel James, in fact, who was talking about doing like a gratitude journal. And one of the things that stuck with me, and I know this is true for me in the past, is he was talking about doing a gratitude journal, writing these things down, but not feeling the actual gratitude. You write it down sort of, but it's like just completely empty. You're like,
yeah,
it's like,
doing your list. You're like doing homework.
And, it's like, are you really doing that? So that's one thing that I've done, but I'd love to hear any takes or tips you might have there.
Do you know what? You've touched on something that it's a perfect example of, I used to love the traditional personal development and self-help world. And as I've gone more down this path, I'm like a gamekeeper turned poacher. I really don't like some of it. And don't get me wrong. Again, I've said to you earlier on, if whatever works for you. So, some of this stuff works for people and that's great. People don't need to do what I think is right. Do what works for you, whatever that is. If it's standing in your back garden with a bucket on your head, chanting Chinese proverbs, I don't care. Like if it works, do it. Pass it on to someone else. If it works for them, fantastic. So that's the caveat to this. But what I learned was, doing positive affirmations and gratitude journals, all well and good. And the problem is with the work I've done is that where the root cause of all this stuff for me is being taught to repress emotions when we're children. And most of the world would call them negative emotions, but I refuse to call them negative emotions now. I call them misunderstood emotions, because for me, all emotions are neutral. There's nothing wrong with any of our emotions. What's wrong is what we think and feel about our emotions. We've been taught that fear is bad. We've been taught that anger is bad. We've been taught that anxiety is bad. People have come to me and said, right, I want you to teach me how to get rid of my anxiety. I'm like, I'm never going to do that. I'll teach you how there's nothing wrong with your anxiety.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you'll be like, oh yeah, because it's just a normal emotion. It's just, this is in the book. I say to people, when you boil it down, what is an emotion? And I remember the first time I thought of this was like, what do you mean? People always go, what do you mean? I go, it's a chemical reaction inside your body. The actual chemical reaction, the theory is, lasts 90 seconds. So whatever emotion it is lasts 90 seconds. If you just do nothing with it, the chemical reaction has gone in 90 seconds. And when I first learned that, I was like, that's incredible. Think about that. So when we feel the emotion of depression, as a chemical reaction, if we do nothing with it, it's gone in a minute and a half.
Wow.
And yet most of us are able to make that feeling last for decades.
Well, I think our attention is like a generator or like an amplifier kind of thing, you know? And so when I lay in the bed in the morning and, you know, I'll think about a friend, you know, a family member, whatever, right? And that helps me to bring that emotion and creates that chemical reaction. And then whenever I focus on that feeling, it just continues to amplify and amplify.
There we go.
Yeah. And we sort of naturally do it a lot of times, especially, you know, in the negative, because it's like you said, you know, and that makes so much sense. It's almost like a cigarette addiction or something like that.
Well, there we go. And we're hardwired, and it goes back to the old tribal stuff, that we're hardwired to focus on negatives, because when we lived in a jungle and we were walking through a jungle, you had to be aware of someone standing on a twig, because if you heard a twig snap, that could be a lion that's going to eat you. So you're hardwired to be anxious and to be fearful and then to be angry, because these things would keep you alive. And then I always tell the story about running from a lion. And if you're attacked by a lion in a jungle and the first feelings you feel are joy, happiness, and love, you're dead. That's the end of you.
Right.
In that moment, they are three very, very negative emotions to feel. You want to feel in that situation fear and anger. They're going to keep you alive. And that's my favorite. Like, we've been taught that these emotions are negative, but they're the emotions that kept our entire civilization alive long enough to build these lovely houses and to feel love and joy and tell ourselves we shouldn't feel fear. And I'm like, how cheeky is that? Imagine, I like to personify everything. Imagine if you could speak to them as people, and you were saying to fear, you're negative, I hate you, get lost.
Right.
You're like, are you joking? I've kept you alive. I've kept this whole civilization alive for thousands of years. And now you want rid of me just because you've got nice TV and social media? No chance. And so I'm jumping all around the place. So loads of my work is the counter of the gratitude, positive affirmation thing. Because I always say, if you've got low self-worth on a very deep subconscious level, and you stand and you look at yourself in the mirror and you go, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself. There's a little voice deep inside that's going, no, you don't. You're a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit. And you're there going, no, 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 no. I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. It doesn't work. The trick is, go into the I'm a piece of shit feeling and go and figure out where that comes from and understand to accept it, and understand there's a whole part of you that you haven't accepted and you deny and you repress every day. And that's the whole book, basically. That's the whole process I take people through. But a little tool that I came up with, and I think this is mine, I don't think I've read this anywhere else. It's the opposite of the gratitude journal. Something I started doing myself and started encouraging other people to do was, don't get me wrong, I think gratitude journals are great, and being grateful for the good things in life, fantastic. And at the same time, acknowledge, accept, and process all of these other emotions. So at the same time as doing your gratitude journal, maybe do your gratitude journal first. Write down all the emotions you felt today. Write down, how did I feel about my boss today? I hated him. I thought he was an absolute idiot. He really, really annoyed me. What did I feel? I felt anger. I felt resentment. I felt some anxiety because I thought he might sack me. Okay, fantastic. Okay, what's happened with our kids today? Well, to be honest, I resent them as well. I've had a moment today where I resent my children. And these are things that, like, people, the number of times I've had conversations with people and I say to them, how do you feel? Like kids is a big one, family is a big one. And I'll say, how do you feel about your kids? And they'll say, I love them. And I'll say, no, I know you love them. And I know that's the acceptable answer. Tell me all the other emotions. And they're like, no other emotions. And you're like, this is a safe place for you to tell me. Go on, you can tell me. Tell me all the ways in which you resent your children for stealing from you the life that you had before. Every time they wake you up in the morning. And you're like, and this is where the black and white thinking comes in again. It is okay to simultaneously love your children and sometimes despise them. Mm-hmm. That's okay. It's just an emotion. It doesn't mean you're going to throw them out of a window. And actually, the more you're able to acknowledge the emotions we've been taught are bad and we should be repressing, the better you'll be. The better you'll be as a human, the better you'll be as a parent, the better you'll be as a partner. And guess what? These things then don't manifest themselves in unhealthy ways because we're dealing with them healthfully.
Man, that's so good. I love it. Misunderstood emotions. What a great reframe. I just love that. I think that's such a great way to put it. My friend Janine, she says that you are not the emotion, and that helps me a lot too. She's a big fan of like EFT tapping. There's lots of different methodologies, but just understanding like it's okay to follow the emotion. You're not the emotion. And it's interesting to think having an emotion about an emotion. So feeling a certain way and then feeling a certain way about feeling that certain way.
And when you start doing this work, it gets deeper. You end up with levels of it. So one of my big things is a big key to repairing your self-worth is to stop being kind to yourself. Because when you start doing it, what you realize is you've got the emotion and then you feel something about the emotion. Well, when you become aware of this feeling, you can then start self-hating about this. Because what's happening is you go, right, I'm angry. Well, now I've realized that I hate myself for being angry because I've been taught that anger is not a good emotion. Well, now I've noticed that I get angry. I hate myself for being angry. And now down here, I hate myself for hating myself for being angry. And this can just keep going down. Yep. So what we want to do is at any point we catch this stuff is be kind. That I love your friends thing. Yeah, you are not the emotion. And that's why I love to do things like, and this is quite maybe a childlike way of doing it, but when you personify things, it's like your mate, there's your mate, he's standing over there, anxiety. Talk to him.
Yeah.
He's okay. It's not you. It's a guy who hangs around with you and he's going to hang around with you for the rest of your life. So get to know him.
Yeah. And it's there for a reason, I love how you, kind of touch on that too. It's like, well, fear, look what fear has done for us. It's like, wow. I mean, if it wasn't for fear, we wouldn't have come this far to where we could feel the creature comforts of modern life, right? Like that was a very important catalyst and an element in our development and progression as human beings. So we should be appreciative about that. That's something that can keep you alive in a weird situation. Something goes wrong or whatever. Like people get superpowers when they get super scared, right? Like you see that mom who like just picks up a truck, to save their child or something. Like that's pretty amazing. That's a product of fear. So, I think that's a really great way to think about it. Those elements and emotions, they're there for a reason, like you're saying, and we need to find out why if we want to do the work. I guess we could also just tap out and be like, nah, it's not for me, but I don't know. I found a lot of joy personally in doing it. I recommend people give it a shot because I think it can be really powerful to integrate a lot of the stuff and to basically redefine some aspects of your life and understand them a little bit better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's lots of this stuff from the outside can look scary, but for me, it's there's so many like quotes about this. There's Joseph Campbell stuff like the treasure you seek's in the cave you're scared to enter and stuff like that, and it's all that stuff. And the reality is everybody I know who's done this work is glad they've done it. I don't know anybody who's done this work and gone, no, I wish I hadn't.
Right.
Like, my life's just generally better. Why? Well, nothing's that big a deal anymore. And everything becomes a lot easier and life becomes just gentler and you're more content, you're more peaceful. And I always say to people as well, it's not magic. You don't get rid of all of the problems in life. I like to use the analogy of waves. I'm sure I heard this somewhere else and I've stolen it from someone else, but like life's like waves. You have got ups and downs. And loads of people think that the idea is to flatten out the waves, like you should never have any problems. But that's not what it is. Think about the heartbeat. Your heartbeat goes up and down. If you flatten out your heartbeat, you're in trouble. Think of it like that. So I always say to the people I work with, and this is another analogy that I love, that I like to keep in my mind. This isn't about flattening the waves. This is learning how to be a great surfer. So when you're surfing and you're on a high, you enjoy it, you love it, you know it will come to an end. Yep. It's not going to be there forever, and that's okay. Because guess what? You need the lows. It's nature. It's night and day, light and dark, yin and yang. All of these things exist for a reason. We come back down, we regroup. So when you have one of those dips, it's about understanding that as well and accepting it as part of the process, and it's all okay.
It is okay. Yeah, it reminds me of the inside of Solomon's ring. This too shall pass. Just understanding that. But I mean, even now I have days where I'm just like, what's the point? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And I have those emotions. They're legitimate, but it doesn't it's just something that I need to face and ask more questions about. In fact, like a lot of the sort of negative emotions for me have led to deep creative, expressions. That's where I've had to dig deep. It's like, without risk of sounding too religious, but like love God and dig deeper has kind of been like my summer this year, where it's like, all right, I'm just going to keep, on this path and keep doing the thing. And when I feel like I don't want to go anymore, I'm just going to dig up another layer. And it might feel like I'm trudging through muck sometimes, but I'd keep going. And I mean, I think having a strong, reason for being is a big reason why that is, and understanding that the scale of self-worth, and the scale and the ups and downs and the wave of life are there, and they're there to strengthen us and make us stronger. There's nothing comfortable about growth.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's really important as well, especially for people like you and I who are sort of publicly doing this stuff, and to share with people. It's something I don't like about loads of sort of the online superheroes, social media influencers. It often comes across that they are superheroes. And I've seen people say, well, I like watching their stuff, but it doesn't resonate with me because I'm not a superhero, so I can't do what they do. And I think it's really important for people like us to go, yeah, I still have bad days. I still have bad times. I still have moments when, even this week, I've had moments, because I've published my book last week, and then I've come abroad for a few weeks just to reflect and pause and plan, and I've had moments where I'm like, what am I doing now? And it's like, that's interesting. And I'll sit down and I practice what I preach. I write about it. And sometimes, and I love this, I love talking to my niece about this, who's 15. And I'll say, sometimes if I'm feeling sorry for myself, I'm like, guess what? System needs a recharge. Sit on the couch, feel sorry for yourself as much as you possibly can, eat ice cream, watch movies, and then your body at some point will go, okay, ready now, let's start up again. And that's it. Whereas in the past, my way of dealing with that would have been all subconscious repression of, no, like keep going, work harder, work longer hours, stay up later. And then if you're feeling down, drink a load of alcohol, take a load of drugs. And it's like, what was the better way of life? Now I'm like, last night I sat on the couch watching Jumanji, eating chocolate.
So good. I love Jumanji. I thought it was great.
Yeah, it's great. I had a great time. I was like, that feels good.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to just enjoy those moments. I mean, some part of like self-development and the hustle, I guess, type of culture too, is just like, it almost seems like you can't ever slow down or take time, for yourself. So there's these two sort of extremes where one is almost like, don't do anything and just, float around. And then the other one is you got to grind, and you're not doing enough. And then that feeling about not doing enough makes, it just creates more and more constriction and lack. But that's not the natural essence of the universe. It's expansive.
100%. I was chatting to one of my coaches about that last week, about balance. Like, life is about balance. And something I thought of when I was writing the book, about the whole idea of balance. I think when people talk about balance, what they mean is being straight down the middle all the time. Like, that's where you're meant to be. You're meant to be in the sweet spot all the time. And I remember thinking, no, that isn't what balance is. Think about it. Think about, picture somebody on a high wire, do you know what I mean, like in the circus doing a balancing act. How often are they just in the middle? They're spending the whole time doing this. And every now and then they'll get into the sweet spot. And you see, it's like, oh, I'm in the sweet spot. It lasts like a second until they correct in one way or the other. That's what life is. We go one way, we observe it, we go, okay, I need to come back to the center. Okay, oh, I'm in the sweet spot. That's really nice. Oh, I've gone back the other way.
Oh, yeah.
If you go to either end of the extremes in the black or white, that's not where we're meant to be. So yeah, you can go and be a monk and live in the hills and not interact with anybody. And if that's what you want to do and that makes you happy, fantastic. That's not what makes me happy. I wanted to do all this work so that I can exist and do the things I want to do and enjoy them more and be content and have those moments where I'm like, I'm fine doing nothing. But if I just sit around doing nothing all the time, my life isn't as good as it could be. I'm not as fulfilled as I could be. So I need to do things then that push me outside my comfort zone, that excite me, that bring me joy. So yeah, couldn't agree with you more.
That's great, man. I love that. Shafi in the chat says that it's a Rumi quote. Life is a balance between holding on and letting go. And I love that. For me, I feel like as soon as I find that middle, I'm like, oh, I'm in the middle. Oh. And then I lose it.
That's exactly it. That is life. That sums up life. It's like, I'm there. Oh, shit. Yeah, you're exactly right.
That's totally my experience, man. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and hanging out. Like, if people want to get in touch with you, I'll make sure that your website link is in the description. It's paul7cope.com. Is there anything else that you want to share with anybody, or links or anything to promote things coming up?
No, you mentioned at the beginning, my whole thing with this is to get the information I've learned out to as many people as possible for as low a cost as possible. So you can download the first 4 chapters for free of the book to check it out. Go to the website, you can get them. It's in audio version and written version. And if it signs you up for my mailing list, basically. So if you read them or listen to them and you don't like them and you never want to hear from me again, just unsubscribe from the mailing list. And no strings, there's nothing in it. There's no upsell. I've been through all of that in my business life. You're in a funnel now and you'll never get out. And I'm going to send you all these emails with capital letters in, and they're going to mess with your mind. And you end up buying a course off me for £20,000. And
That's right.
there's none of that. It's literally like, and I see online marketers saying to me, well, what are you doing with the funnel? And I'm like, it's not a funnel. I'm just trying to help people. Right. So that's it. It's like, what? You're just trying to help people? You're like, yeah. I believe that if I help people, like, my life will be okay. Like, I believe this shit. Do you know what I mean? I don't need do you know what? Maybe people will want courses at some point and I'll sell them if they want them. But right now, if you want the free chapters of the book, go to the website, have a look at them. No strings at all.
Yeah.
And as I said, if you end up buying the book and you don't like it, it can be used for multiple other things. So.
That's right. No, that's great and very utilitarian. I appreciate that. And I love that perspective. I appreciate all your work. You're doing great stuff, and it's super nice to meet you, and really grateful for the time to be able to chat. And thanks everybody for coming to hang out with us. Likewise. Thank you for having me on. I appreciated it. It is a pleasure. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so very much. And have a wonderful rest of the day.